Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today with lots and lots of news. Our lead story is the aftermath of the tragic shooting in Georgia. The father, Colin Gray, of 14-year-old shooter Colt Gray, was arrested and charged with manslaughter and more. Hunter Biden pleads guilty to tax evasion and could face up to 17 years behind bars. And Donald Trump will find out whether New York Judge Juan Merchan will met out his sentencing for the felonies or punt until after the election. Telegram founder and CEO Pavel Durov speaks out for the first time since his arrest last week in France. We begin, though, in Georgia. Winder, Georgia is still reeling from Tuesday's shooting at Apalachee High School that killed 4 people and injured 9 others. Colin Gray, the father of 14-year-old gunman Colt Gray, was arrested Thursday and charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts of second-degree murder, and 8 counts of cruelty to children. According to the affidavit, the arrest warrant alleges he gave his son a firearm knowing he was a threat to himself and others. Per CNN, the father told Barrow County Sheriff that he gifted his son the AR-style gun in December of 2023. That was the same firearm used in the Apalachee shooting. That father was arraigned Friday morning. This case is now the second in U.S. history in which a parent has been charged for their child going on a shooting spree. In April of this year, the Grumbleys were sentenced to 10 years in prison for their son's 2021 mass shooting at a Michigan high school.
Now, more information is trickling out about this suspected shooter, including that the FBI had linked a Discord account to Cole in which he shared plans for a future mass shooting. He also posted screenshots of firearms, according to documents that CNN obtained. The Discord account also referenced Adam Lanza, the Sandy Hook shooter, and captioned the photos of firearms, quote, "I'm ready." So this family was under a bit of investigation. There was in advance officers that had gone to their residence specifically about these concerns that, he had aspirations to become a mass shooter, was very interested in all of this. And so for the father to gift a gun to his son that was, investigated for this, there wasn't enough evidence that he was going to do anything. So law enforcement didn't feel they could take action at the time. But what kind of father would arm a child that was investigated for this? So I believe in red flag laws. I think they're one of the few things that don't jeopardize Second Amendment rights and actually could have an impact. I think they would have prevented something like this from happening here, Amber, although I would like to believe a parent would.
Yeah, I guess the question is, would you red flag the dad because the kid was only 13 years old, so he's not even of legal age, obviously, to purchase his own firearm. He would have had to get it from a parent, and this is negligent at best, but the decision-making from the father is completely out of bounds, and the FBI failed miserably here, too, of course, by interviewing this kid back in 2023, just a year ago, and not taking greater steps to prevent him from committing an act like this. They basically took the dad at his word that he had guns locked up, that the kid wasn't going to be able to access them, and then a few months later apparently gives him one for Christmas. Unfortunately, we see too often with these mass shootings that there were often warning signs, and in some cases the FBI knew in advance, just like in Parkland when the shooter there was called in multiple times by friends and family members who were worried that he was going to do something, and the FBI failed to even investigate those tips. I guess we could say that at least the FBI decided to follow up in this case, but there has to be something beyond just talking to the kid, getting him in some kind of mental health treatment. If he's in a bad home environment, getting him out of that home environment. According to a really bizarre Facebook post from the shooter's aunt, he had a lot of struggles at home. It suggested to me that there was some kind of abuse going on, and that is unfortunately often the case with these school shooters, is that they have a very difficult home life, a very tragic home life, and they commit these horrible acts for some kind of deranged form of attention.
Right. Yeah. It feels like almost emoting, expressing an anger at society, at their community for, I don't know, failing them, which certainly happened here. For the father to arm this child This wasn't, a good dad, I will say. If you know your kid very well and you hear something like this about them, I mean, wouldn't you take every possible action so they don't go down that path? I mean, even not just to be a good parent, but to be a good neighbor or a good community member or a good person. And so it definitely seems like something has gone wrong here. So many times when you hear about mass shootings, your brain goes to we, as adults have failed children. People have a right to peacefully go to school in a modern country. That's like a no-brainer. The fact that we can't keep kids safe in public school in their K through 12 education is really sad. And it's a damning thing on communities. I don't really point to the lack of restrictions on guns as the main reason for this, because time and again we find out that people in the community, that law enforcement, that family members, that classmates are aware that someone is a threat. And time and again, that person who is a known threat ends up being the suspected shooter in one of these mass shootings. And so it's really sad. And it feels like we as a society have failed time and again in so many different ways. And I can't imagine these kids that grow up going to school afraid that it could happen to them are going to have a lot of faith in government or in larger society in the United States. And that's going to be a whole additional crisis we have to deal with when these kids become of voting age, when these kids become decision makers in our society. That's really concerning as well. And I don't fault them for it because it's true that we failed them.
Right. I mean, it's an important point about gun control measures because obviously in this case, again, this kid was 14 years old when he committed the shooting, 13 when he first started making threats. I would just challenge anyone who's pushing for some kind of law in reaction to this, which one would stop a 14-year-old from getting a gun that doesn't already exist. There is a federal law that requires you to be 18 to purchase a rifle. You have to be 21 to purchase a handgun. Those age restrictions are already in place. Basically, the only thing that you would be able to do is ban guns entirely and stop people from having them in the house, which is a violation of the Second Amendment. There's been reporting that school shootings, at least the casualties from school shootings, have increased since the pandemic. And I don't find that all that surprising. As we're talking about the reasons why people commit these acts, we often find that these are people who were isolated, who were lonely, who had tough home lives. And unfortunately, during the pandemic, a lot of schools were shut down. That safe haven for kids in a lot of cases was gone. They were stuck at home with perhaps an abusive home life, abusive parents or siblings, and they didn't have a way of socializing with their friends. And people who were already kind of struggling with socialization only had that issue compacted and compounded even more aggressively. A lot of kids, even if they're not committing school shootings, are struggling immensely with learning loss and a lack of development of social skills since the pandemic. And I don't think we can allow our public health bureaucrats and our governments, our state governments especially, who made these policies, to forget that they implemented something that was incredibly harmful for young people. And I think we'll continue to see the impact of that for generations to come.
Right. These kids are traumatized for the rest of their lives. The interviews with the children are heartbreaking because we have so many mass shootings happen in the United States that when this took place and the high school's name was trending, the Apalachee High School in Georgia, people said, I just saw high school trending on Twitter and I knew it was a mass shooting. And it can be tempting to tune out because we hear so much about these mass shootings. But honestly, I think it's good that they play the interviews with the kids on cable news so everyone can see because they're like, I pray actually every day that it doesn't happen here. It's not like I didn't think it could happen here. It's I am worried it would happen here. And that's sad that that's reality for these kids. One of them said the officers were telling us, not to look around. And I know it's, protocol not to look around, but I couldn't help but look around. And I looked over and saw a kid dead. Imagine going back to school and trying to learn in a place where that's happened. That's sad. And that's going to be horrible for these kids' education. Education outcomes, I'm sure, are affected by the reality that they have to have these lockdown drills. I remember having them. We didn't call them, shooter drills, school shooter drills. We just called them lockdowns. But now it's very well known what these are about. I mean, when I was in middle school and elementary school, they kind of shielded us from that. They were like, oh, it's just in case we all need to lock down. There's storms, there's this and that. Now kids are fully aware of this very violent reality. and live a part of their lives in fear. What's that going to do to their nervous system as they age? There are so many implications to this, and we've really got to find a way as a society to come together and give someone the support they need if they're suspicious a family member could turn into this, or a classmate or what have you. Because it usually you hear something horrible about a family member, and it can be devastating to hear a family member would do that, but you deal with it. You say, okay, this person maybe is a little bit of a monster, and you get resources and you get them help. And so, this idea that that hasn't happened, I think, is an indictment of maybe people not being good community members and supporting people who have a son or a family member going through this, or a classmate.
Yeah, and as important as it is to take this problem seriously and address it head on, I also think helping tamp down the fears by being responsible about coverage is important too. There is a lot of, I think, analysis from the media that suggests these are far more common than they are. When we look at the Washington Post school shooting tracker, for example, they include a lot of things that we would not typically consider to be a mass school shooting. So, for example, if someone brings a gun into the parking lot and leaves it in their car and somebody finds it, that's considered a school shooting. Or if there's an accidental discharge from a security officer or something to that effect. There have been cases where there have been domestic disputes on off-campus college apartments that have been considered school shootings. So when we actually look at the statistics of it, these are still incredibly rare. And so I don't want us to also be, putting fear into kids that shouldn't be constantly scared that going to school could be a death sentence. That's still not the reality in America, thank God. One final point I wanted to make on this, and then I'll throw it to you for the close, Jessica, is that there was this really nasty article from the Associated Press. And this is something that happens all too often, unfortunately, in the aftermath of events like this, is that it becomes very partisan and very nasty. The Associated Press ran an article with the headline that J.D. Vance says school shootings are a fact of life and calls for better security. And Zaid Jilani actually pointed this out. He is obviously by no means a conservative. The actual full quote that J.D. Vance said was, "I don't like that this is a fact of life," meaning I disapprove of how common they are, saying, "But if you are a psycho and want to make headlines, you realize that our schools are soft targets and we have got to bolster security at our schools." So for them to take that quote out of context like that for the sake of scoring cheap political points after 4 people just died is a major indictment of our media landscape right now. And again, I think my overall point with all this is we all need to be more careful in how we talk about these things too, because the immediate panic is the type of thing that inspires copycats. Because again, this is an attention thing, and fear mongering about it and being too breathless about it doesn't really help either.
Yeah, I will say the technical statistic for a mass shooting is 4 people shot or more. So I haven't seen, the statistics of mass shootings misrepresented,
Yeah,
because that's a pretty
I should
clear and
say
cut.
school shootings. I should say school shootings as opposed to mass shootings. They have the Washington Post has a school shooting tracker that includes some of those other instances I mentioned. But thank you for catching that.
Yeah, I think we've seen 50 people killed in school shootings in 2024 alone. That's just too many lives lost, too many kids going to school to get an education that, end up killed at the end of the day. And I think Congress, we have so much talk about, gun control, so much talk about, mental health being the main concern. It's one thing to say be good community members, but this is something that Congress can put resources to, because a lot of people, especially in the working class, cannot afford health care, let alone mental health care, which usually isn't included in typical health care coverage. If we are to allow people to be good community members, we've got to ensure that people have access to health care and mental health care, and put their money where their mouth is. If you think it's a mental health problem and you're a member of Congress, if you want to do something about gun violence, vote for the dollars to be allocated and the tax dollars that are collected, a part of the public money, to go back to the communities of the people who work so hard to generate revenue and generate profit in our society. This is something that people need. Congress needs to put their money where their mouth is and actually allocate the dollars necessary to address the issue in a meaningful way. I think we're at the point where you can say it's a mental health issue till you're blue in the face, but at the end of the day, you don't really care about it unless you're willing to do something about it. And so I'm just really sick of mouth service from Congress when they're in a position to act and we're allocating billions and billions of dollars every year to the Department of Defense to overpay to weapons to send to a genocidal regime that is responsible for killing children. It just feels like we've got all of our values and morals backwards, especially among our elected officials in Congress who have done nothing on this issue in a meaningful way.
All right, we're going to leave it there. We'll be back with more Rising after this.